wild tonight and maybe rewild the Greenbelt, huh? The Hermosa Beach Museum is a nonprofit. We're not financially supported by the city. We serve in their grace, of course. We have membership that we raise money with. We have a gala every year, which this year is August 26th, and it's a pretty good party. There's cards out front on the desk as you come in or go out that you can pick up. We'd love anybody that would like to come join us at the gala. We have food sponsors, and it's for food, liquor, wine, and music. It's quite a gala. Tonight we're here, and we want to welcome Jim Light and the South Bay Parkland Conservancy that doing some pretty exciting things on our Greenbelt. And I'll let him talk about the Monarch butterfly and the blue butterfly and all the good stuff he's doing. Let's give him a good hand.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes. So thanks, John, appreciate it. We're honored to be here tonight. My name's Jim Light. I'm the president of South Bay Parkland Conservancy, and I'll be sharing this discussion with you with Jacob Barbarigos, who's our director of conservation. He was also the lead on the project on the Greenbelt. So just this is what we'll be talking about tonight. I'll give you a quick overview on South Bay Parkland Conservancy and our projects, and we'll get into details on the Hermosa Greenbelt project that we've been doing. We'll have some closing remarks and then Q&A, but feel free to interrupt at any time and ask questions. We're willing to go as deep as you want to into the topics. So South Bay Parkland Conservancy, we've been around since 2004. We're a nonprofit supported by government grants and by donations from residents around the area. We were originally formed by now Mayor Bill Brand in Redondo Beach to start the advocacy for turning the power plant Redondo Beach into a park. We knew there was wetlands there. Bill and I did the analysis that the power plant was no longer required, and so we started the lobbying to prevent that. We think at the end of this year, this will be the last year that power plant runs. So right now at the state level, they've put out their draft report, and continuing to run that plant is not in it, and AES has told the state they have no intention to run it after the end of this year. So hopefully we'll get that done. Then what happens after that's the next big challenge. So. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So our mission is to preserve, enhance, and expand parkland and public open spaces in the whole South Bay area. And so we've built some strategic thrusts around that, and you can see them up here. The first, and with the rewilding of the Greenbelt, is restoring and expanding native habitat in our area. The second is Redondo Beach, unlike Hermosa, has had no community garden ever. And so the city approached us about potentially doing that. There was a group that was advocating it with the city, but they didn't have the 501c3 to be able to conduct it. So we took that project on, and we just opened it June 15th. So that's open for the public now. Influence public policy, things like pro-parkland, recreation and open space, and also pro-urban forests and native plants as you get into how you plan out a city. And then the fourth area is to educate the public. So those are our four strategic thrusts that we have active right now. I'll do an overview of the projects, and then I'll let you jump in, Jacob, for the specifics, because Jacob is more in tune with our projects and is hands-on with them. As you can, it's hard to read, I apologize for that, but the projects we have go from Alondra Park next to El Camino College all the way down to the Esplanade Bluff. And so that's kind of our area. There's other nonprofits that are restoring habitats in the area. So we tend to go to the end of Hermosa, the northern end of Hermosa, into the base of Palos Verdes Peninsula. And there's other people who take care of the areas beyond that. I'll talk about a couple of the projects here. We did a fun one here at Fort Lots of Fun. If you know where that is, off of Prospect. Some Girl Scouts came to us and said they wanted to build a monarch garden. They had all the plants wrong, so I came in with 5 slides to kind of, because they're 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, right? So I had 5 slides. They kept me there for an hour and a half, and they actually redesigned their whole garden themselves. So that was a really fun project. Let's see, right here you see Hermosa Park and the old Salt Lake. So that's one of the things we've been pressuring from a policy perspective, and just recently, that Hermosa Park is the 5 acres next to Hermosa between the power plant and PCH. The city has an agreement now with Southern California Edison, and we're working with them on the contractor that will be planting that out. That's a little stalled right now because if the power plant is going to shut down, Southern California Edison will want to pull the wires out, and the city of Redondo doesn't want them running over all the plants they just paid to put in. And in the AES site, we helped build the case that there is an active wetlands there, and the Coastal Commission ruled that there's at least 6 acres of wetlands that has to be there no matter what happens. So we're very proud of our role in that. I documented, along with Audubon Society, 133 species of birds use that site. And it's sad to see because it's all in the revetments for the old oil tanks, so you know it's polluted and grungy, but there's 133 species of birds that use that every year, and it never goes dry. We did catch AES trying to dry it out one time. They turned on their dewatering pumps. We sent pictures of 2 weeks, 2-week span showing it, the water dropping. We recorded sound of the pumps running, sent that to the city council. In Redondo, they called the Coastal Commission, they sent out a cease and desist, and then it filled back up. So we've got our eye on that. We're hoping that comes to fruition. I think both those projects would be a great benefit to the residents of Hermosa as well. So you have more people right on the border of those 2 projects than Redondo does. Yeah. The rest of it I'll let Jacob cover. I'm not going to cover every one here, but you can see this all started snowballing in 2017 when Jacob actually came on board with us. We were all policy and advocacy before that, and Jacob said, well, I'd like to do something to get my hands dirty. So Wilderness Park was our first effort, and Jacob, I'll let you, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about a few other things and I'll turn it over to you. Oops. So just to give you an idea of how much we've snowballed since 2017, last year, we put almost 2,000 plants in the ground. No, this is the wrong one, sorry. What's it? There we go. Last year, we put over 4,000 plants in the ground, native plants. We had over 1,000 volunteers at our different events. We had more than 2 events a week for the year on average. And the total hours was over 2,000 hours of volunteer time that got put in. That's a substantial amount of support from the community. So this year, to date, we put in about 2,000 plants, and this is through the end of June. 2,000 plants, 2,000 volunteer hours, 89 events. So we're doing more events than we did last year, and we felt swamped last year, and 954 volunteers. Just on the Greenbelt so far, through the end of June, 888 plants, 11 events, 163 volunteers for about 328 hours of volunteer time donated to the city. So thank you to the volunteers of Hermosa. We also do, we have an educational program run by Mary Simon, who used to be a teacher in this area. She's a biologist who taught environmental science in the area. So we have, before each of our volunteer sessions, if you've been there, Jacob will give a little talk on what we're doing and why. On Wilderness Park, we have an annual 2-day event with classes and chances to get your hands dirty, a sleepover, and then bands and food on the Sunday. So that's a growing event for us. We're going to have to start limiting the number of campers because it's getting too big for the park. We've taught classes at Redondo Union High School. We also do a junior urban naturalist program, which is a once a month walk for kids through Wilderness Park, where Mary and some of her other helpers, they give the kids a little notebook and they get to actively go through the park and identify different plants and things like that. And that's been a great program for us. Alta Vista, we've done planting sessions with Alta Vista Elementary School in Redondo. We have 4 little gardens that we've set up for them of native plants and pollinators. So that's been exciting. We also do ad hoc training. I told you about the Girl Scouts event that we trained them on. And then we also sponsored our first small scholarship, $1,000 scholarship out of Redondo Union last year, and we're hoping to grow that program as well. So with that, I'll let Jacob talk about some of our projects here. Just a quick overview, and then we'll dive deep into the Greenbelt.
Hey, it's nice to see some familiar faces out here. Seen a lot of you all out on the trail and different projects, so I know this is going to be old info for some of you. And some of you have been here from the start of these projects back in 2017. So our first project was Wilderness Park, and that was something that was brought to us by a concerned community member and native plant specialist, Bill Pettit. And it was his vision to create an outdoor learning center in that park. And so the residents who know that park, it's a unique space. It's a very natural space, natural topography. Most of our parks throughout the county are leveled and graded for sports and different activities. And very few of them actually have this natural component. So we're very fortunate to have this park in our community. I actually didn't know about Wilderness Park until my son had a birthday party there one time, I think back in 2013. I've only been here since 2011. But so Wilderness Park is a mixture of history and just past, present, future type activity in this space. With the Tongva history, using the area and the hilltop as a lookout, to later in the 60s when the aerospace, the military used the hilltops for radar, missile defense system. And I think that was all dismantled by the 70s. And so that park was then deeded over to the city by Hopkins. I'm forgetting his first name, but he was the general manager of the city at that time in Redondo Beach. And so in the early 70s, they established this park, and then over the years it went into disuse. And so we went into that space to rewild about 3 acres of habitat. And we've seen return of species now that we're in our 5th and 6th year. The western bluebird, the Aquin blue butterfly. Jim spotted that one. We actually thought it was a El Segundo blue, and we got really excited. But the Aquin blue butterfly is another tiny blue as well. And so from this site, we've based our strategy pretty much of creating areas of outdoor education where people can come get their hands dirty, learn about plants, work throughout each step of the process, and then be able to interact with their families and whoever in different capacities. And so I've been there, I don't know how many hundreds of events that I've personally attended, and Jim as well has been there. I don't know how many events he's attended, but a lot of volunteers have come through the community through this project alone. Is it the right area over here?
Down there. You're good.
Okay. So some of these pictures, you can see some of it then and now. This back hilltop is facing the western sea and has mostly dune plants. And so the park has different examples of plant communities. This hilltop has a lot of dune, like I said, and then there's coastal sage scrub, some chaparral, and also oak. More and more oak trees. We planted probably about 26 different oaks in that park, from small oaks to large 24-inch box. So that's all part of this long-term initiative to not only have a natural space where it's green with trees, but one that is full of biodiversity, and it creates an opportunity for people to get engaged and to learn. So from this space, we have a lot of our educational walks. Mary Simon will lead the children through here. We do our Earth Day events here. And so it's kind of a showcase for some of the other from the plants that we use in all of these projects. The Bluff Garden is a really important garden that was county owned, that was spearheaded by Deirdre Brand, who was on our board until recently. And this space, just on the end of Avenue I, was also covered in
Yeah, this is near Now Hill.
Oh, Nob Hill. Oh, I said I. Nob Hill was ice plant, and if you go there now, it's a design space with irrigation as well, and so in just a space of a couple years, it's become one of our showcase spots where people every day are walking along the Esplanade Bluff, reading about the information on the sign and reaching out as well on how to get involved. So nearby Wilderness Park is Alta Vista Elementary Native Garden, and Jim has been a big force on this project, along with Agak Shenfu. Her daughter goes to this school, and so the goal is to along the rise of this playground area is all grass and weeds and not really used that much, and so they've created an amphitheater around the garden area where the elementary school kids are, an amphitheater of native plants. And Jim, what are your observations out there as far as the biodiversity that they're finding?
Yeah, so almost immediately you can see this is about the end of the first year, which we were shocked that it grew that much, but we started seeing the Western Blue Butterfly, Western Bluebird, which was over deeper into Alta Vista Park. They were coming into here to feed because of the pollinators and other insects that this was attracting. We've also seen the monarchs come by here all the time. We have narrowleaf milkweed, so they lay their eggs in there. And they're getting, I've never seen it like this, but the narrowleaf milkweed is like a bush. And they'll get almost picked bare by all the caterpillars that are on it. And just a variety. We've seen 5 different species of bees and probably 20 different species of butterflies and moths that have aggregated on this site since we planted it.
This is a really important project because it's a place where the kids are going every day, and where they don't normally have access to wildlife, and now it's around them all the time with the bugs and the things that a lot of us grew up with. I know I grew up with and have seen throughout my life those spaces more and more limited, and it become harder and harder to find bees and butterflies out in the city. And that, with the threat of urbanization always expanding, is the problem that we're trying to reverse in so many words by rewilding these different aspects of the South Bay. And so schools is a really important aspect of this plan. School parks like Wilderness Park, schoolyards. A lot of our schools around this area have slopes that are covered with ice plant and weeds that are not used. And so we can create a vibrant space for wildlife.
And we'll be starting a program with Vista Elementary this fall. So we tried to start it this year, but the teacher was too busy with end of school year stuff, so we're going to start it next year on the ice plant slope just in front of the school.
So those of you who have been involved in the Redondo Beach Community Garden, that has been an exciting project to pull together from all the different avenues, from funding to support from the city to a large group of very dedicated community members who weren't going to say no and let it go away. South Bay Parkland Conservancy has been supporting the community garden concept since I first found out about the organization. I think that was in 2016 or 15 or something like that. And that was actually the first way that I found out about the organization. I heard that there was something going on in my own city, and I'm like, well, that's cool. I was into guerrilla gardening and things like that, because you just can't, there aren't these spaces all around. And so there's those who reclaim that. And so that concept, even though it wasn't accepted at the time, the Conservancy still supported until really this year, 2023, finally got the garden in play. And so how many beds do we have in there? 24?
26.
26 beds. All those beds filled up through lottery, and real quick to show that there's a huge need for these spaces throughout our community, not just Redondo Beach, and Hermosa Beach has its own in South Park. We actually patterned our idea very closely after Hermosa Beach's garden. But we hope to see spaces like this open up around the community. And a good thing about this garden is that it has a community open space that's covered with a canopy for different classes and outdoor interaction. And the slope that rises above all of these garden spaces is we've rewilded it with native plants. And so that will also become a place of education. It has a fountain as well, water source for the pollinators. And so we really are excited to see that interaction with the community and the wildlife in this community garden. The Esplanade Bluff. This is a project that started back in 2005, and Andalki Urban Wildlands Group, Travis Longcourt, that's right, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, in partnership with Beaches and Harbor and LA Conservation Corps as well, for years back in since 2005. Also, Mary Simon in her biology class. They started, I think it was in 2003, planting in Torrance. So this effort, it's been about 20 years of rewilding on the bluffs. And in September of 2022, SBPC basically took on the project in partnership with all of these organizations. The component that was missing was the community and the ability for those who were local, who really cared about the space, to get involved. LA Conservation Corps is a fantastic organization. It brings inner city youth from all around LA and gives them a lot of experience. U.S. Fish and Wildlife as well. It's a U.S. It's federal organization, so they're not necessarily connected to who you talk to, who lives in the neighborhood. And so around this project has been led by Jim Montgomery. And throughout this last year, we've seen a huge insurgence of attention that grew from the Esplanade Bluff Garden, kind of came back and gave new life into this project. And so we had to work with the city of Redondo and the LA County to get permits. Funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife came through and was approved $80,000 to $80,000. And so that's a 5-year fund and a 5-year effort to create connectivity. I think we have, here we go, connectivity down these different parcels of the Esplanade Bluff.
Yeah, we've got the current grant we're on takes us to Avenue C, if you know the Esplanade in there. So we'll still have more to move north, but everything up to Avenue C will be done over the next several years.
And there are other sections as well. The LA Conservation Corps is working with Beaches and Harbor.
They're closing out their last project, and then they'll work for us after that. We'll get the contract with them, and we'll be leading, because that's what U.S. Fish and Wildlife wanted. They like what we've been doing.
That's right. So how it works is LA Conservation Corps as well. They go out and do a lot of work preparing the space for native plants, removing and those invasive species. And they've been doing that and will continue to do that as well. The volunteers, though, what we've seen is, I've never seen the bluff since I've been here in the condition that it's at right now. It's really transforming at a fast rate. You can see here a picture of recent springtime. We have a lot of new natives popping up, lupins and poppies and verbena as well. Creating a lot of color that actually existed here before that we're missing a lot now.
We figured it was a big success when we started seeing pictures like the Segundo Blue Butterfly popping up on people's Instagram feeds. We knew that we had hit a nerve with the public, and we've conducted 2 walks this year. We were worried because of the rains; they came out late, but they showed up on the days we did the walks, fortunately. So
Yeah, we'll talk more. Jim will talk more about the Segundo Blue Butterfly, and when it comes out. It's actually right now the butterflies are out, and so you can go on the bluff and see a lot of the work. We actually stopped work in May around the sea cliff buckwheat. The parvifolium, we don't want to disturb that habitat area. The butterflies will lay their larvae in the mulch, and then they'll use the rest of the plant as well. And so typically you don't see the butterfly until the plant starts to blossom, and that's where we're at right now. We're hoping to see this population stretch, not only as we continue the expansion of the Bluff project, but to see how those populations continue to jump from project to project and through to the Greenbelt. Let's see. There we go.
here, I'll take this. I'll take it from here.
Okay, go ahead.
And then I'll turn it back to you. So rewilding the Hermosa Greenbelt. So under this part of the discussion, we'll cover some of the history. I figured since this is a historic society, we'll give a little history. Why rewild the Greenbelt? We'll talk about where we're at right now. You must have been an AV guy in high school. Where we're going. We get a lot of questions about ice plants, so I'll cover that. We'll talk about the monarch butterfly and the Segundo Blue as we go through this. So from an ancient history perspective, before this area was settled, the beach cities were all just dunes. So you can see these are the ancient dunes, and then as we get closer to when man came on board, the dunes started to confine themselves to the coastal area. So everywhere under us, there's sand. If you've seen somebody digging a house out, building a house, you go down a few feet and there's sand underneath that, and that's the old dune system. There's sand and very loamy soil as you come inland. The habitat was coastal sage scrub, what's called coastal sage scrub, and there's some of the plants listed there. I'm not going to go through each of them. However, that habitat was decimated by development. I mean, the coastline is very popular. So between throwing invasive plants out there like ice plant and between development, most of the natural habitat of the coastal dunes has been decimated. And there's groups like South Bay Parkland Conservancy that are trying to restore small areas of that where we can. So this is a topographical map from 1896, and obviously you know the Greenbelt, hopefully you know, the Greenbelt was a railway in the past, and this shows the path of that railway as it came through. It largely it was built to carry lumber from what was the port of LA, Redondo Beach, to the city of LA as it was building up. But they also ran a passenger service. That passenger service ended in 1918 when the Redondo Red Line opened, and that ran closer, it ran right along the beach. So that was a different path than this. This was the Santa Fe Railway that we're seeing here. It was also an alternate route. So as they started opening up the SCE power plant, now it's AES power plant. It was the way they got a lot of their supplies in there. So that line, even though they moved passenger lines over to that red line, there was still some cargo coming through for the AES site, or SCE at the time. Santa Fe officially abandoned it in 1983, and the tracks were pulled up in 1986, which is actually, if you think about it, relatively recently. This is an old picture of the Redondo Salt Lake, if it was better resolution, what you could see is there's tons of lumber piled up on here, and the tracks went right through there and then went across from the Salt Lake north into Hermosa, and then through Manhattan and up to LA. Here's another old picture that shows an aerial shot. This is the original power plant way before the current one was there. This was from the turn of the century. But this shows the railway and how it snaked through there. You can also see the other line went between these two roads, the red line. This is what it looked like in the 80s after abandonment. I think both of these are from, I couldn't find a Hermosa example, but both of these are from the 80s after it was abandoned. And then some of to get to modern times, so from the 60s, resident Jack Velasco, who eventually became a council member and mayor, along with his neighbor, started to do what we call guerrilla gardening and planting trees along the what we call the Greenbelt today. In the 70s, as I said before, the rail line was barely used. A lot of folks were using it as a jogging and walking path, and in 1978, the city proposed a jogging path along the right-of-way. In 1983, Santa Fe actually officially abandoned the tracks. Manhattan Beach originally considered allowing Santa Fe Railway to sell it off for a hotel and some commercial development in return for getting the rest of the section for free, but that fell through. The Friends of the Trolley for a short time proposed a new trolley, light rail system to transport people go through there, but that never made any progress. Then in 1984, there were two initiative votes two measures on the ballot between Manhattan Beach and Hermosa. Hermosa voted against increasing taxes to outright buy the right-of-way, and Manhattan voted down the commercial use proposal. So kind of different outcomes there. One protected it, the other was like, well, we don't want to pay for it. So that left it in limbo. By 1986, Manhattan bought 23 acres for $4.2 million. And somewhere I read that they allowed Santa Fe to develop a small park, but I haven't found out what that was. So I'm going to keep digging on that and see if I can figure out what small part Santa Fe Railroad actually developed. In 1987, Rosamond Fogg from Hermosa led a group to fight commercial development on the right-of-way here in Hermosa. And in 1988, the voters approved a measure for the city to pay for the right-of-way. And the city bought 19 acres for $7.5 million. By the end of 1989, Hermosa officially took possession of the property. But that wasn't the end of the battle. I guess the city wanted to turn a lot of it into parking lots. And same person, Fogg, led a group to fight parking so that on the Greenbelt. So the city compromised, and so you can see those little parking areas carved out on the side, but it was supposed to be much greater. So it's been citizen action that has saved this Greenbelt for what we see today. So Jacob, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So why rewild the Greenbelt? What we found is that the Greenbelt is this critical corridor that connects existing populations of the Segundo Blue Butterfly, from populations in Palos Verdes to populations down the coast. The next is to provide native pollinators for overwintering monarch butterflies. And so the Greenbelt there's different sites along that corridor where the monarch overwinter, and you can see them up in the trees during the wintertime in December or so. We're trying to improve the overall ecological value of the Greenbelt habitat. Up to this point, it's been a variety of exotic species, and from a few natives to palm trees to whatever really we wanted to plant in the 90s. I think that happened from that point on. And so, but we have very little habitat for our native pollinators. We're looking to instill community stewardship and improving, maintaining the Greenbelt. So one thing that was lacking was a way forward for community members to get involved and to participate in this park space. Up to this point, you saw some of those numbers. We've had hundreds of people come forth already from different schools, from service clubs, businesses as well. All different types of groups come forward to just community members, parents with small kids. So just within a year, we've seen a huge change just in that, a different type of connection with this open space that we didn't have before. So by providing this education to the community, we've enhanced the understanding of habitat in our area. We've kind of been disconnected from the plants just through overdevelopment. So when we go out to these workday events, our workday events start with an educational process, talking about the plants and so forth. So here you can see some of the populations that we know on Palos Verdes and in Malaga Cove as well. So the Redondo Beach Bluffs provide a really critical point to bring the butterfly up the coast. And then there is a huge gap that we have, and I believe we talk about that later as well. But our proposed project here at the Greenbelt provides this critical segment between the Chevron refinery and other populations that all the way out to Biona wetlands. So each one of these sites, and these aren't all the sites as well that you can find the butterfly, but these are some of the major sites.
And the yellow ones on there, let me just quickly talk to that. The yellow ones are ones that we're working on each of them brings the two populations closer together. But when we're examining this area through Hermosa Beach, the Greenbelt is the only path to do that connectivity, because you guys don't have beach dunes the way the other cities do to the north and south of you. So this is the only way we can get connectivity from the Redondo population to the El Segundo population. And that's why this project is so critical to the El Segundo Blue.
Why is it important to connect these two populations?
Well, because these are still well, I'll get into that a little bit, but since you asked, the El Segundo Blue is an endangered species. It was actually only discovered in the 70s. They thought it was extinct, and they found it up in PV and a couple other places. They decided that they have to expand habitat for this species to survive. The reason you want to connect the populations is for the diversity in the genes, so that you're not getting one set that's kind of inbreeding, and if they suffer a catastrophic event, you've lost a major segment of it. So connecting them is very important for biological diversity and for resilience, so that they can survive into the future.
You know, also, because they used to, they were here, they lived up and down the coast. Hundreds of thousands of butterflies would flow through these corridors that we now live. And so when we lost that habitat through development, we lost that connection and identity really with these insects. And so hundreds of thousands of all these different types of butterflies that in a very short space of time in history disappeared. We're talking like 50 to 70 years, a very short space of time, but in our lifetimes. We know that the El Segundo Blue was discovered at the refinery first, and there they still have a small preserve. It's off limits to the public. They really don't do public interaction with that space, but I think they do something with their employee staff. But you can kind of drive up to a corner of that space and see the slope and all the parvifolium that they do have. What you see in each one of these locations is a different assortment of variety of plants. From very basic, like at the Chevron, just sea cliff buckwheat, to much more elaborate at the Biona wetlands and Palos Verdes, a diversity of native habitat. So with the Greenbelt, we have an opportunity to increase that biodiversity with plants that hasn't been included in some of these other projects. So we've been talking about the Monarch as well, and how the Monarch is on destination to the beach cities every year. This is where they want to come, and we've identified different locations that are overwintering spots. So Wilderness Park, the Greenbelt has been identified, Malaga Cove as well, are all spots where we have the Monarch. And different thing about the Monarch is that the Monarch from the larva is that the adult butterfly needs flowering natives, different types of flowering, whereas the larva needs that one milkweed. So the Greenbelt gives us an opportunity to focus on these flowering plants that the adult monarchs need when they're coming through. I haven't personally seen monarchs overwintering on the trail yet. I know that Jim, you went out last season.
Yep.
And saw some, not thousands of them yet, but maybe hundreds.
They were better 2 years ago than this past year, so. But they're here. I just didn't see the big clumps.
Yeah, you typically you look for eucalyptus eucalyptus groves. Even though the eucalyptus isn't a native tree, the monarch does like to overwinter in that. Some of the others are the pines and the cypress.
Monterey pine and Monterey
Monterey pine.
cypress.
That's right.
Are the other two plant trees that they tend to congregate at. But eucalyptus is if they have a preference, they will go to the blue gum eucalyptus for some odd reason. I don't know why they've adapted to that.
Yep. So as we move forward, right now our focus has been on low-growing shrubs, not necessarily planting trees. But we do have an opportunity to focus on habitat for the monarchs moving forward, bringing in more trees creating groves of interest that hopefully would become sites of vacation sites for these butterflies. So those of us who live around here and are familiar with the trail, we see a lot of ice plant, of which we're going to talk about later, of what ice plant is, where it comes from, and why we are working to remove good segments of it throughout the Greenbelt. Ice plant being a monoculture, that means it basically creates an area where only one plant can survive versus a large variety of plants. So it grows out in this tight mat, pretty much, and it chokes out tight, low-growing mat with very shallow roots as well. It does provide value that we love. It's the thing that struck me first years back was how green everything is, and I think that that has a good calming effect. On the flip side, though, it doesn't provide the ecological diversity that we need. Let's see, on this next side, we can see that there's a lot of ice plant throughout this, through the Greenbelt. And the goal is not to necessarily remove all of it, because there is benefit to having it. And I think really what we're working to do is create these islands where the butterflies can jump all throughout. So we really can work. The goal is not to replace all of these mature exotics. It's not to take the trees or the shrubs or the flowers out, except maybe in small areas where we're working to create these islands of habitat. There's lots of nasturtiums, for instance, a lot of flowering invasive plants and exotics that are really beautiful. And so when we're focusing, the spaces that we're focusing into on the Greenbelt, so you can see these yellow areas, all within the last year, are predominantly ice plant, with the exception of a couple different spaces that had a lot of grasses and different weeds. So the grant that we received.
This is a grant we've submitted.
We haven't received the grant, that's right, but we submitted a grant to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to continue the work down the corridor. And now we're in the later stages of that process, where we're hoping to get a site visit scheduled, hopefully soon, we'll see. But they're very interested in this project. It's something that the wider community, from Friends of Bayona Wetlands to Palos Verdes Land Conservancy, other nonprofits, we're looking to work together to bring back this species. So it's not necessarily to rewild the whole thing. but 50% would even be more than enough to do what we need to do without severely changing the look of everything. The original funding came from an anonymous local resident who came forward and was really interested, like a lot of you are, with the Greenbelt, and wanted to see some of that same work that we were doing in Wilderness Park be expanded. We received city approvals in May, started last year in June. So it's only been about a year working from 2nd to 6th Streets during that first pilot project on the Greenbelt. Later, we were selected by leadership Hermosa for not leadership Herondo, but leadership Hermosa for their 2023 class graduation class project. And that was a really great process, working with James, working with Brian as well, and their whole class over this past year of 2023. And other notes, the grant is $1.9 million from the Coastal Conservancy. And as I said before, we survived those first rounds of cuts and are looking to continue that throughout the process of Hermosa. Some of the plants that you can see on the palette here, the 30% of everything that we put out, about 25 or 30% is just that one plant, Seacliff buckwheat, the Eriogonum parvifolium. And then the other portion, the rest of those plants are a mixture of coastal sage scrub mostly, and also dune plants. So you can see we have a mixture of sages from black, white sage, Cleveland sage, hummingbird sage, sagebrush as well. Lots of different flowers that flower throughout the year. So the goal is these native spaces are evolving, and year to year they grow. It takes them about 3 to 4 to 5 years to really mature and to grow to their full size. We have been planting these plants a little closer, denser, with a more saturated content of natives than you might find in the wild. You might find just a whole hillside of just Artemisia and maybe a few other plants. But in our planted areas, we have the monkey flowers and bladder pods. We have a good 120 species from Wilderness Park to the Greenbelt that you can see in these concentrated areas. So what we're creating here, as you can see on, let's see, this is Ardmore Park, is that what it says? So from 2nd Street, we have...
2nd Street's on the left there.
Oh, 2nd Street up there, okay. And this is the, in the middle is Mary Wilson Butterfly Garden. So there's existing areas of...
In South Park, the big green.
Oh, this is South Park, that's right.
Top. Up right here.
Okay.
This is west.
Oh, I was flipped. Okay, that makes sense, okay. So existing populations or areas of native habitat exist at the Marion Wilson Garden, later on down the pathway at Valley Park as well. And so our goal is to connect these existing areas. So as far as about 5th Street here, each area is a little different, but has pretty much the same plants, a variety of these coastal sage scrub. Throughout 2022, you can see the community engagement that we've had. We have some people here that, do we have your picture up there? Yeah. So we actually removed a lot of the ice plant ourselves. And so those who helped us in that last summer, that hot summer, removing the ice plant, we rolled it back like a carpet, chopped it up into enchilada pieces, and then had that removed later. And so that was a big effort, bigger than you might imagine, and yet we would have all different types of community members, from families, young families, strong young high school kids all coming out. Every time it would be different, and yet the same effort was created. We were able to remove a lot of this ice clamp and then engage people in different aspects of the process, from digging holes to irrigating the holes and planting them. So we've seen a lot of people from I think it's 6 different high schools, a lot of students from El Camino as well, and local service clubs, clubs that are kind of starting recently, and they're trying to find ideas of what to do. And to most recently, Leadership Hermosa, catching wind of some of this work and then really helping with the expansion of
You've got some slides on that.
That's right, of those areas. And I think those are, so here you can see some of the before and after. This is at 2nd Street. It's an area that has some vendor board perimeter around it, and the city asked us to work on that space to create, to divert the traffic to the crosswalks, like they have been doing at different street ends throughout the Greenbelt.
How much irrigation goes in there? Are you doing a lot of drip irrigation?
Right now, it's just the existing irrigation, the pre-existing irrigation.
Which is a problem because we're overwatering some of these
I was wondering,
plants.
that stuff's going pretty strong, yeah.
Yep.
That's right. So right now, and that comes to the next steps of the Greenbelt, is to retrofit that existing irrigation system. Because as we know, these native plants, they don't need that much water. And when you give them more and more water, it can limit their lifespan. So this is at 2nd or 4th Street here.
Yeah, that's
There was a walking path that the city had asked us to plant to cover, and while it was used by the city and by community members a lot, it would put them right into the middle of the street in front of the park, and become a safety hazard. So this area, I think I'm forgetting the total number of plants in just this segment, but we did it in phases throughout 3 or 4 different 3 months, through June, July through April. April, you can see the super bloom right here. After we put the plants in the ground, we went through in the winter time with native wild seed mix and scattered those so that we would have these wildflowers fill in the gaps between the shrubs that we planted. So here are some, you can see the lupins and the tiny tips, poppies, exploding throughout the springtime. These, right now, the wildflowers, they dry out, and then we basically want to wait to have the wildflowers drop their seed so that those wildflowers keep recurring every year. We're hoping to see these wildflowers spread down the Greenbelt, and so that we don't have to necessarily travel 2 or 3 hours across town, or even to Palos Verdes to see what a super bloom looks like. We can go right here in Hermosa Beach. So this brings us back to Leadership Hermosa, and it was led by, like you said, James Lennonhead and Brian Katz. They did a lot of great work raising funds, interacting with local community members, hosting public engagement for residents, and really educating a lot of people. I'm not sure how many events off the top of my head we hosted, but it maybe a dozen or more where Leadership Hermosa came out in force, helping us to both remove invasives, maintain and plant these areas. So these areas, they're labeled A, B, C, and D, and it's pretty much at the Gerondo, the start of the trail, or the end, however you look at it, at Gerondo. And this brings our pilot project that much closer to the Redondo Beach Bluff restoration area. There's still a gap in between where those are, where
And I'll talk about that.
and Jim will talk about that. But the difference here is that I was explaining to I'm sorry, I forgot your names.
Oh,
Roseanne. Roseanne and that's right. They helped us remove the ice plant in our pilot project. This time we had the city landscaper come in and remove the ice plant. That kind of took a lot of the party out of the process for us. You know, made it very, very simple for us to come in and just work with a clean slate, which is nice to do. Made the process very, very streamlined. Any questions about that? Yes.
Well, yeah, it's something I haven't touched on yet, and we're calling them coyotes. Has this been an attraction, a magnetic attraction to coyotes? Because we only started to hear about coyotes in the last year or two, and I guess the coyotes didn't like ice plant either. So I'm just curious as to whether or not this has been a plus, and whether if they had the chance to come here tonight, the coyotes would be fine.
So far, it may once those are mature, but so far they're too young. The plants are too young for them to be a real habitat for the, and usually it's either denning, when they're in denning season, or it's just a place where they crash to sleep. But so far, the ones that I've been talking with the city folks, where they found them is more the deeper where people planted the South Carolina myrtle, the ones with the pink flowers, and some of the shrubberies that are more mature that are around. They go behind those and interior to those because people can't see them. But these are too low right now for them to be a habitat for coyotes to sleep, and certainly not to den.
You know, but let's be
So
honest,
this is not
it
been
already
attractive.
is habitat for the coyotes. I know that it is a hot. I've seen the coyotes.
Well,
Really
we see them jogging on the trail, but
chase the dogs.
where they're sleeping is back in those bushes. And I can walk you down and show you the places where the city found them. And they cleaned out those areas to drive them out, so.
Also, the ice plant has lots of rats in it, right? Which is food for the coyotes too.
Hmm.
So we're taking away the species, the habitat for a lot of the food for the coyotes.
Yeah, most of them are cutting through here. There's lots easier places for the coyotes to eat. Overflowing trash cans right in the park across the street. People hate to hear it, but feral cats and free-ranging cats are easy pickings for coyotes. But a lot of it's trash that they're finding in when they get the coyotes or they do the scat analysis. Because it's easy pickings, and you know they're predators. They want to expend the least energy possible. So it's the trash and cats that are the main. Every once in a while, a dog if someone lets their dog out. But it's mostly the garbage that attracts them.
One other question, you mentioned nasturtiums. I've noticed a lot more nasturtiums in the past few years than there ever used to be. Is that because someone's throwing seed there, or are you?
I don't know if people are throwing more seeds, but certainly the rainy season this year helped. And nasturtiums are an invasive, not from this area, and they are spreading out. In fact, the one area, the area across from South Park, we have to constantly, they're always trying to come back in. So we're pulling those regularly. So that's the definition of an invasive species is one that spreads itself very easily and very fast and displaces other native plants.
Can we come down and get to restaurants? We can eat them.
I'm sorry?
We can eat them.
Nasturtiums?
You
Yeah.
know, I thought about that, but the Greenbelt is irrigated with purple water.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's a good idea or not.
Let's keep going, Jim.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good idea to eat anything in the Greenbelt because of that water being recycled. Yeah. One last question.
It's cool.
My question is a little hard to verbalize, but those annuals, those flowers that you do the seeds out, once they're done flowering and they're tall and dead and you're waiting for them to drop their seeds, they look pretty darn ugly. You get complaints about that, or what do you think about
You know, that is part of the natural cycle of the annuals. And so typically as a gardener, you can go through and you can clear out. As soon as they're done blooming, you can cut them down, but then you lose the seed for the next year. And so our process is more to wait a little longer before we go through and clean some of that out.
We're going a little long.
Okay. So we can skip through some of this, just some of the before and after. The section A, recently planted. So the difference here is that these plants, when they grow, they'll fill this space, and then the space starts to evolve. Right now, the wildflowers fill larger spaces, gaps between these plants. As throughout the years, that'll be smaller and smaller, and we'll have more of an evergreen plants and more of a green space. It's harder to expect that in the first year of growth. It takes several years. Section C and Section D, as we saw on the map, finished pictures here. So again, these are pictures of a lot of the different volunteers who've come out over this season and taking part in different steps of the process. This shows all of the areas that we've rewilded up to this point. And the areas in red are the leadership Hermosa areas that were recently done, and the areas in yellow were part of our pilot project. So moving on to what's next. Well, we have weeding this Saturday. Love to have you come out if you'd like. And the weeding is something that happens every other week. In the rainy season, there's almost too much. It seems like you could be there every single day. But then those weeds die out on their own, and over the season we keep working until through the end of August. It'll be harder to find these weed populations. It's harder for the weeds to bounce back as we come back with frequency. We're looking to put an interpretive sign as well. We're hoping for the Coastal Conservancy grant that we talked about, with that site visit coming up, as well as the potential for other grants. Like as we said, there's a lot of region-wide focus on the Greenbelt as far as the importance. And so connecting these other projects, existing projects, with the Greenbelt is something that we're looking to attract more funding to do that. So moving on to the Segundo Blue Butterfly.
So I'll try to go through this quick. We've talked a lot about it. If you haven't seen the blue butterfly, it's only about as big as your thumbnail. And just a little thing, you'll see a flash of blue flittering around. But once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. You'll see them during the June, July, a little bit of May. When you're walking by these bushes, these sea-cliff buckwheat, all of a sudden you'll see this flitter and you'll know that's a blue butterfly. We talked about the population locations. The goal, as we've said, we're working with the Segundo Blue Butterfly Coalition to link the habitats. And the big concern we've had is the gap between the Redondo Bluffs and the dunes in Manhattan Beach. So the Segundo Blue is totally dependent on one plant, and that's sea-cliff buckwheat. That's the only thing its larvae will eat, and that's why it's endangered, because as we developed the area, as we put in houses, as we put in green grass lawns, as the railroad threw out ice plant, it got moved out. It got killed and run over. So they were almost wiped out as development and invasive species were introduced to the area. We've already covered this one, so I'm not going to go through it again. There is still one area of concern. If we get this greenbelt, we still have to get from the bluffs, the end of the bluffs in Redondo, over to the greenbelt. And I just got last month have an agreement with the city that they're going to start planning out the medians on Catalina with sea-cliff buckwheat to help that connectivity. we're also starting a program this fall where we will donate seacliff buckwheat plants to people who will put them in their yards within a quarter mile of either side of Catalina, so that we get this corridor.
How many would you like to plant in your yard? Like, is 3 enough, or do you need like 10 or 20?
So typically we like 30% of whatever island they're going to be in, but 3 to 5, I would think, fronting the lawn would help. And especially if we get multiple lawns doing that, multiple people doing that, connected with those medians. We're also working with the city on potentially doing it in a couple parks, like, what's the park that, Zuliger Park. And then there's some places in the harbor that they're going to be re-landscaping. So every project we get, we're trying to get that. The El Segundo, the furthest the El Segundo Blue will fly, according to biologists now, is half a mile. And so we're trying to make the longest distance a quarter mile to increase the opportunities of them finding the new islands of seacliff buckwheat. And so far, every place we've expanded on the bluff, they've moved there themselves. The biologists thought we'd have to grow some out and introduce them to the site, but they've come, as we've gone north, they're all the way up to Avenue I, which is as far north as we've planted seacliff buckwheat. So we're excited. We think I'd love the day when we announced we found an El Segundo Blue right here on the Greenbelt. And of course, we talked about this. The SE property will have some habitat. We know that at least 6 acres will have to be wetlands. We'll make sure seacliff buckwheat's on that. And then the AES site, and then we've got this project here under the SCE power line. So we've got this end taken up, and now we're trying to work this connectivity in the middle. The amazing monarch butterfly. I don't know how much you know about the monarch, but they are amazing, amazing creatures. Their life cycle, the eggs hatch in 4 days. They're a caterpillar for 2 weeks, and they kind of molt 5 times to get bigger and bigger. Then they form a chrysalis. They're in the chrysalis for about 10 days. And then on the normal cycles, the butterflies only live 4 to 6 weeks. So those you see around there, they're on a pretty short cycle. There's 4 generations per year: March and April, May and June, July and August, September and October. Well, you may notice there's a big gap. How do they survive that if they only live 4 to 6 weeks? Well, the 4th generation is the one that migrates, and those live between 6 and 8 months, except where we monkey around with them. So there's this process called diapause, where the hormones for reproduction are halted in them as their local buckwheats start dying out, and not buckwheat, buckwheats start dying out. They go into diapause, so they're not producing those hormones that make them mate. Amazingly, that stops them from aging too, and that is what enables them to do the final migration and to live through the winter. Where they start finding tropical milkweed, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but tropical milkweed interrupts that because they go, oh, I can breed again. I found this milkweed that's growing in winter, so I can start breeding in. Well, that starts them aging, and they only live 4 to 6 weeks once they find that tropical milkweed. And then they don't migrate because they've given birth here. So it's disrupting the whole population. People mean well. And so it's hard to, get mad at anybody who's trying to help them, but tropical milkweed is not a good thing for them. What a lot of people don't know is, when we started with the Girl Scouts, I felt bad. They put out this big poster. All these monarchs go to Mexico every winter. Well, that's true if they're east of the Rocky Mountains, but ours, the western population, the vast majority of them stop on the central coast or the southern coast of California. They don't go all the way to Mexico. There's a few that break that rule, but in general, that's the case. So we are their winter spot, and it's very important for us to provide the habitat to help them survive. So the reason they come to spots like us is we have a mild climate, and then they find groves of trees. They like that eucalyptus tree, like I said, but they'll go to Monterey pine and Monterey cedar that are protected from the winds, and that's what the Greenbelt provides, and they're protected by the development to the west of them, so it's a very calm environment for them. And so they'll gather up in the trees there, and when you see them gathering at night, that's to keep warm. They're generating heat, and they get bundled like that so they can transfer heat to one another. So that's, I talked about the diapause stopping, and that's what allows them to live. How do they migrate? They actually have two internal clocks. We have one, that works on a 24-hour cycle. They have that one, plus they have one that looks at the whole year. And so they sense the sun through their antenna, not through their eyes. And because of this year-round clock, they get a picture of which way, well, they flip the sides so they know which way they're going. And they also know where the sun is during that part of the year. And the 24-hour one tells them where it's at in the sky from a 24-hour period. So in the mornings here, if they're coming south, they'll say, oh, I gotta keep the light on the left of my antenna. In midday, they're looking for it straight ahead, and at the end of the day, they're looking for it in the right. Then that angle clicks around when they're ready to migrate north and says, no, it's the opposite. And so that's how they're able to migrate and navigate to their spot. So just an amazing insect between the 4 generations per year that have different lengths that they live in, the diapause, and this dual biological clock mechanism that lets them migrate. So overwintering monarchs do not need milkweed. What they need is pollinators that are blooming so that they can eat. And they will forage for about 5 miles from wherever you see them clumping at night. So one of the things, we changed our palette once we understood that there was overwintering monarchs here to make sure that some of the plants that we're planting bloom in late fall, some bloom in winter, and some bloom in early spring, so that they have food until they're ready to start migrating north. They've evolved around our native milkweeds, which go dormant in winter, which is why tropical milkweed's bad, because it doesn't go dormant in winter. It also turns out that they transfer this parasite that's called OE. And because the natives die off, when they transfer this parasite to the native milkweeds, it dies off every winter. And so they start with a very low count, well, no count in the spring, and then builds up over the year. Tropical milkweed builds it up until it dies, or somebody cuts it back. And so they just transfer more and more of this stuff to the next butterflies that come around. They lay eggs, which transfers to the eggs. So it starts killing off the whole population. Tropical milkweed can be invasive in our area. We found where our sites are downwind from somebody who planted it, we're pulling it out of our sites. So it's invasive. So even if that owner says, I don't care, I still want to do it, they're affecting, the habitats around them. Oh, also just recently, I know some people like to grow them out. It's actually bad for the monarchs. They've done studies and found that the monarchs that are raised in captivity are weaker than the ones that grow up in the wild. They don't know the mechanism for that, but there's at least 2 independent studies that came to that same conclusion. So they recommend only doing that for educational purposes or if you're a researcher. So with that, we'll jump to ice plant. What's wrong with ice plant? Ice plant comes from South America. It was put here by the railroads first, and then later the Department of Transportation to stabilize the soil because it's fast spreading, so it's easy for them to throw out and walk away from. It's very low maintenance and it's drought tolerant. So, turn of the century, they thought this was a great thing and they thought they're doing great environmentally, but they didn't understand habitats the way we do now. Ice plant is very invasive. It grows up to 3 feet per year. A single plant can grow 150 feet wide as it matures. It forms deep mats that block the sunlight. In fact, this is the deepest ice plant we've run into, I think, because the city waters it so much. But we've gotten sections that are 3 feet thick. And then it has 6 inches of detritus, the old dead ice plant, underneath it. It's easy to propagate. You can break off segments of it and toss it on the ground and it will come back up. And it also gets dispersed by seeds, so birds, the winds, people brushing into them can spread their seeds. And it also, oddly enough, it changes the soil chemistry underneath it. So it's like doubling down, saying, I don't want anybody growing around me. I'm going to poison the soil underneath me. So this is a very nasty plant. It reduces biodiversity, and it does that. First, it kills out the native plants, and then the insects and animals that rely on those native plants don't have food, so they move out. So it just reduces biodiversity in the whole area. And blocking the sunlight and changing the chemical of the soil, that prevents seeds from coming back. So first it will overgrow something that's growing. We have that. We found that on the bluffs, the earlier parts they're planting on the bluff. Some of the ice plant came back, grows right over top of the natives and just smothers them out. And then if seeds blow into it, it's so dense they can't grow up. Between the soil chemistry change and blocking the sun and the consumption of water that they do, they prevent any other seeds from taking root. So that monoculture that starts establishing itself, it supports limited species, and it really ruins biodiversity. The other thing is, if you notice, it only blooms once a year. So when it's done blooming, that whole area is nothing to even pollinators. So it's bad. And then when it does bloom, it has fewer flowers per square yard than a normal native plant would have. So this just shows, if you put a football field down there, that's what one plant grows to and would dominate. This is an eye opener. If you just take the number of native species that ice plant is a native host of, it's 0. If you take the sea-cliff buckwheat that we're planting, it will host 44 different species on it, and that's just buckwheat. And we're planting, I don't know how many 30 other plants species. So the biodiversity is much greater in the areas that we restore than the ones where the ice plant's just sitting there doing nothing for the native habitats. The other thing is, even though you're not concerned about it here, but the bluffs in Redondo and some of the cliffs at Malaga Cove, it's actually really bad at stabilizing slopes. The roots you can see here only go down, for most of the plants, only down 4 to 6 inches. The main plant may go down to 1.5 feet, but to compare to the sea-cliff buckwheat, that will go down 12 to 15 feet and out 12 to 15 feet. And that's what really stabilized the slopes and the dunes here before we messed up the whole ecosystems. Oh, and also, when these get heavy, in the winter, when they get water in them, they get really heavy, and they have actually started landslides because they get so heavy, their roots aren't in deep, so they fall down, and then it just opens up the gullies underneath them as the rain comes down. So I don't know if you noticed the recent landslide in Malaga Cove, most of that was covered with ice plant. So I'm not saying the ice plant triggered it, but it didn't help certainly didn't preserve that bluff. So I think that's it from a tech. Any questions? We covered a lot of stuff, especially towards the end there. Yes, sir.
So, what about reptiles? Do they come back with the native plants?
So, we need to do some bio blitzes, but we find lizards in the ice plant. Mm-hmm. They certainly we see them more frequently in what we've restored because there's more dirt that we can see them on. It's tough to see them when they go underneath. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I'd say that there's more one way or the other. But we do know with insects, there's more insects, and what do the lizards eat? They eat the insects. So, you hypothesize that that's the case. We certainly see the different species coming in, like the western bluebird wasn't in Wilderness Park. When we planted native plants, they are now breeding in Wilderness Park. So they're finding insects that are coming back with the natives and are taking it. So I hypothesize that the lizards are there, but frankly, we've seen them. You see lizards in the ice plant as well. Okay. So we need you. Obviously, these projects wouldn't get done without the volunteers that we have, and we thank each of you who have come out. I hope it was rewarding to you. We live on donations and grants, so donations are always very welcome. Come out and volunteer. We've got a ton of opportunities to volunteer. We run more than 2 opportunities a week on average for people to volunteer. We're also we would love to have a lead pop up for the Hermosa to become the main steward for Hermosa. We have one now, as Jacob mentioned, with the Bluffs in Jim Montgomery. We'd love to find somebody in Hermosa who is willing to work with us and be a lead for the Hermosa Greenbelt. You can also help us by spreading the word, letting your neighbors know, letting your city council know that this is a good thing that you support. And if you have any questions, you can go to our website and you can find all sorts of information as well as volunteer opportunities. So with that, thank you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate this opportunity. Sorry for going a little long, but it's a lot of information to cover, and Jacob was slower than I wanted to be.